Hi everyone, you should be able to hear me. If you are able to hear me, say something on the chat so I know that you can hear me. And I'll switch the camera to my desktop first in a second. Okay, Yaruka. Loud and clear. Okay, so first I will show you my desktop. Okay, you should be able to see my desktop. Yay! The stream is a little bit laggy today, so there's a lag between your comment and when I can answer, so just be aware of that. And today we'll be using Photoshop for the first part. And I would like to show you today some things about how I choose colors, because you ask me a lot about how I choose colors. So I wanted to show you how I choose colors for my digital paintings, and then we will switch to my camera and I will show you my how I choose colors with watercolors. And something is not right here. I'll just adjust this. In the OBS software that I'm using for streaming. Let's make it like this. Okay. So I chose to do this based on this picture. This is the picture I did with my iPad a while back when I was painting outside. And this picture was actually made outside while the light was really strong, so I did not see my screen clearly, so I wanted to wait, something is not right here. I'm sorry. Okay, this should be good. It should be good. Okay, so this picture again. Okay, start. Let's start again. Okay, this is the picture. I'll be explaining you how I choose colors based on this picture. And I did this picture on my iPad when I was painting outside, and this is more or less what I was seeing that day. So let us first see this example photo that I took that day, just for my information. This is how the world looked for me that day. So if you can see here, the shadows are really dark here. Maybe I'll open it in Photoshop so I can make some arrows. Okay. So if you have a look at this photo, this is more or less what I was seeing. Probably I was seeing even more contrasted thing. The lighting in Japan can be really harsh. So for me, the lightest part was probably here the road, or like here the highlights on this building. So this was my lightest part from which I started, and these are the darkest parts here. And if you have a look here at the shadow, the shadow is really dark. It's almost black here. So we almost cannot see anything here in these parts because it's too black. And even here, like the tree is really, really dark. It's almost black. The sky is almost white. So the dynamic range on this photo is really wide actually. So we have burn color that is not showing because it's too bright, and we have details that are not showing because they are too dark. So the first thing that I always do when I consider a scene, not necessarily a scene that I am seeing, but a scene that I have imagined and I want to draw, is what time of day and what kind of a feeling of an atmosphere I want to get in this painting. So, for example, in this painting, I wanted to produce something that was bright and not so contrasted. Uh, of course, if you have a morning scene or a night scene, the colors you would choose are different, but the basic thing is to kind of decide the amount of brightness and contrast that you want in your work. So for example, let me open a new file. Okay, so for example, on a photo like I showed you, if we make a graph of colors that are these are the whitest colors and these are the darkest colors. Some stuff was lost here, and there was stuff here, and there was stuff here, and again some stuff was lost here. These are the whites that got lost, and these are the darks that got lost because it was too dark from here. So this information got kind of lost, and we could not see it on the photo. So whenever I consider a scene that I want to draw, I kind of make a decision in my mind where on the scale I want to be with my colors. So for example, in this picture, I want to kind of remap this to the colors I want to use. And I want to use bright colors with not so much contrast. So I'll be painting probably somewhere here. So I will not use I don't know why I have a connection lost all the time, but today we have technical problems. Wait, let me take the mouse and just turn it off. Like, maybe it's too far. Okay. So in this picture, I want to paint in this kind of spectrum of colors. So I will not use the whitest whites, and I will not use the darkest darks. I could paint in the whole spectrum, making the picture really contrasty. But in this picture I wanted something light, and I wanted something not so contrasty. I wanted something like fresh summer day with not so heavy shadows. So I chose to paint in this kind of region using all different colors in this region. And often in animation we don't use whites at all, and we don't use black, like almost black darks. So we kind of tend to paint in this kind of region here. But for this picture I went even further in and used only colors from kind of this part. So what do I mean by this graph? if you look at a photo like this and you look at the histogram here, so the graph that shows you what colors are used. Can I make it bigger? Apparently not. Expanded view? Okay, I can do expanded view. But this histogram shows you what colors were used in the entire image. So there's a lot of darks, and there's a little bit of like the middle ground here, some highlights and some whites, and there's a lot of clipped white here. And if we load the finished image to Photoshop, you can see that there's some whites, but there's almost no blacks. We have a little bit of middle ground here and some highlights here that stand out, but everything is kind of moved to the lighter colors. And of course, if you want to paint a night scene, this would be the other way around, so you would use only darker colors and maybe some highlights here and there. So when you choose colors, having in mind like the width of the colors that you're using on this graph and the contrast between them and the amount of colors is really good way to think about choosing colors before we even start going like which color we will use for the highlights and which color we will use for the shadows, or shall we make it like warm or cold or cool tones. So I start my kind of thinking process earlier, and with this illustration what I did, if we look at the stages, it's like today my computer is giving me a hard time. Okay, so if you look at this illustration, I did some screenshots from the video I had. I started painting from this booth in the middle, so this place here, and I really liked this blue tone that is a base of this picture in a way, because it's repeated in all kinds of places. So let me just hide this layer. So I was drawn to this kind of shade of blue because it's on all kinds of places in the picture, and it's kind of a neutral tone between really harsh highlights and really dark shadows. So I wanted to use something like this for the base of the picture. So I started to paint with this kind of blue color. So this is our first color that we choose in this picture, and with this we kind of establish the base from where we are starting. So this is our first color. I'll just erase this part here. Okay. And so this color that we want to use as a base for our painting is more or less kind of in the middle. So now we want to decide also a color for the shadows, and if you look here, I tried two tones that I thought would be nice for the shadows. One is more reddish blue and one is more yellowish blue. And because I was kind of looking at the scene, I thought, okay, I like to use more. I would like to use more reddish blue here for the shadow. And this is just a choice that I make in this picture. It does not mean that for all pictures I would use like reddish blues for shadows. Most of the time, for example, in my watercolor paintings, I would use helio turquoise, which is more on the right side, so more like this. than cooler blues like this one. But because I wanted to make this picture look more on the cooler side, not so much saturated, more pastel looking, I went for the warmer looking, this blue here. And if you look at the second stage that I took a screenshot of, you can already see that I used this blue in some places. So let's mark it on our kind of sheet. We are in the darks here, so I chose this color for the shadows, and it goes more or less here. So it's not like completely dark and black, but it's more or less here on the scale of the colors that we can produce. Um, if we would go to see what color would it be on the Photoshop palette, probably something like this would be the darkest ones, that the darkest color that we could make. And so this would go like here on the scale of darkness. I will flip this so it matches the histogram of Photoshop, so you are not confused. Probably you are confused already, but so here are the darkest and here are the whitest colors that we can use. And so the next step was to choose a nice color for highlights, and like bright color that I could use for highlights. And if you remember, I was talking about making backgrounds for animation, and almost never we use like really white. Uh, there are some technical reasons for this, because, for example, white, so 100% white can be recognized by animation software as mask, as a place where the stuff should be transparent. So it can cause some errors down the line. So we did not use really white, but we always use like off whites. But I always think that it's better to use a color that's little bit creamy, little bit off white. And when you are painting with watercolors, it's naturally so, because no paper is perfectly white. Even if you scan it, it's not perfectly white. So you can have it naturally occurring, especially if you are using like natural white papers. But here I decided to use a color that would be something like this, and I'll mark it like this part here, and this is almost white, but most like here. So here we have like a nice yellow that is not 100% white. So let's mark it on the chart here. So it's kind of hereish. There are some white accents here and there, so let's mark them here. I did not make animation background. It's not an animation background, so I was using just colors that I liked. So there are some really white stuff here, but I usually avoid it. Okay, so if you look at the next stage of this picture, it will not allow me to open it like this. Okay. So if you look at the next stage of this picture, I'm really going forward with the colors I chose. I tend to copy colors, so I use the same color in various places. So I use the same blue here, and I use the same blue like here and here, and then I copy it here, so it's used in a lot of places. And in watercolors I achieve it by using just the same colors, so I use all the time, I use the same colors. But in Photoshop I kind of try to consciously use a limited palette. In Photoshop you have an unlimited number of colors that you can use. You can use whatever color you want from here. But if it's possible, I try to use a color that already exists in the picture. And if it's not enough for the picture, I try to pick a color that's like kind of closest to it, and then adjust it using the sliders here. And I have to be kind of conscious about the saturation and the blackness sliders, especially together, because if I push them like too far this way, so um, I'm kind of getting closer to the white. Na zdrowie. I'm getting closer to the zone that I don't want to be. So if we look at the uh, at our graph, I'm getting too close to here, and if I push the sliders too much to the black zone here, I'm getting into this zone here, which I don't want either. So when I paint digitally, I pay a lot of attention to the sliders and where are they at when I paint. So I don't use colors from like zones that I don't want them to be. So uh, so far we had like the blues and the color of the shadow and the color of the highlights, and I use them all over this picture. And for example, I have this color of the blue here, so I slide the slider a little bit. So I slide the slider a little bit like here, and I have a nice like orange highlight. Or I take this orange color here and I use it like on the poles here. Or I take the red color that I chose um, for this like fire extinguisher box, and I use it here. And the same goes with the brown color. So I try to reuse colors as much as I can. So this is the easiest way to kind of stay consistent throughout the whole picture. So throwing colors from here to your picture does not work if you don't know what you're doing. And even for me, if I would have to choose the color from this palette from scratch each time, it would be really difficult. So if it's possible, I try to take a color from the picture that I already have and modify it a little bit, and then reuse it on the picture. So I would take like this red, and I would be like, this is a nice color intensity and a nice color darkness for like a main color. So I would just slide the slider here on the right and get a nice green, for example. But okay, this color is a little bit too saturated for the picture, so I would turn the saturation down a little bit maybe. So I would get like this color, so I could use this color in the picture. And I'm going about colors like this in this picture. As you can see, I chose now really close color to the green that I actually used in the picture. So for me, like, these colors are about here, and here is the green and the red of the box, and maybe this color. These are my three main colors that I try, 3 or 4 main colors that I try to reuse all over the picture, and also this orange, like light orange, more or less like here. But also when I started painting things, I saw that I really need a color that will be just this little bit darker for this really dark parts here. I could use this color of the shadow that I already had, but I decided to make it just a bit darker so I could enhance kind of the stuff in the background. So I made this color here, and it is actually the same shadow color, just made darker a little bit. So let's put it here on the chart. So this color, it's like a special color, it goes about here. So now we have like a consistent palette that we can use for the whole picture. And If we need some colors that are darker, for example, we can mix those color that we these colors here that we have. So we could take like this kind of green and we could mix it with this color, for example, to make a nice darker color for our trees. And just a minute. And if you see, I actually have a color like this here on the trees, actually really close to the one that I made just now. But for me, like, deciding colors is more of a process than just following some rules that I have and they like kind of stay unchanged. I try not to adjust the colors that I already used, but I also use layers in my paintings, so if I really need to, I can adjust the color. Okay. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Is everything alright? ちゃんと聞こえる？よいしょ。Okay, so for example, if I have, let me just check here. So for example, if I have this bright color here, this is one of the colors I would just choose arbitrarily. It's not by any rule, or if I have like this purple here, it's not also by any rules. I don't follow anything. It just I have some pink flowers here and I want to match this color to the rest of the picture, so I tend to choose a nice pink color in this kind of hereish region of the colors. So for example, if I need to choose a nice pink for the flowers, I would go like for this slider here, not too saturated because it would not match the other colors, and about here, not too dark because it would go into the dark regions, and not too light because it would kind of explode also, so around here-ish. And then I can adjust the hue of the color as I wish. I think the flowers should be like kind of this, and I paint it and I'm like, that looks okay actually. So this is more or less what I would do for the flowers, and this is what I did for the flowers. Here I made them more reddish, but this is more or less what I would go for when I was looking for a new color to use. One of the things I would like to say here is, like, I do not use multiply layers if I don't have to. I do it sometimes in my digital paintings. For example, if I would like to put a big shadow on everything that is here, I would make a new layer and put it into multiply, and I would choose the color that I use for shadows in this picture. So for example, this color here, and I would put a big great shadow like this. But it's really useful, and for some colors it looks and works really well. Sorry, it works and looks really well, but can be difficult to control if you overdo it, especially with more saturated colors. It's easy to because you are not kind of controlling this mixture completely. You don't know the value of the color and the saturation, the blackness of the color that will be the result. You didn't make the color, the computer makes it for you. So if you check the color, you could get into this kind of dark zone or into this kind of saturated too much or too little zone really easily. So I personally prefer to check the colors myself and to make the colors myself. So I would make an object. For example, let's do it here. So I would make an object like, let's see, something like this. So I would make an object. I have to make it on a. Oh, okay, whatever. And I would put a multiply layer. I could put a multiply layer over it and make a shadow. But what I prefer doing is something like this. Make a new object. And then make a new layer and set it into the quick mask mode. And then I can choose the color of the shadow by myself, like for example something like this. And I can put it, maybe let's make it more obvious, and I can put it over the object like this. And then when I need to adjust the main color of the thing, I can just adjust the color, make it more bright for example. And then when I need to adjust the shadow, I can adjust the shadow separately. And this is a lot more kind of foolproof way of coloring. So I would recommend not using multiply layers if you don't really have to, and you don't know, if you don't know what to do, like resorting to multiply layers for shadows and for example screen mode layers for highlights is not very good, because you can easily kind of go outside of the planned color scheme that you already have on your picture, like go somewhere here or here. I have the new Photoshop which changed the undo shortcut, and it drives me up the wall. I have to change it back or... Okay. So, Mariana asks, sometimes I hear, na zdrowie, that when a picture does not have enough contrast, it can look dull or lifeless. What do you do to avoid it? かなちゃん、朝の写真撮ったスクリーンショット、なんか可愛いやつ1枚僕のパソコンに、写真つうかあれ、スクリーンショットジブリのやつ僕のパソコンにアップしてくれる？結構なんかコントラスト少ないやつ。Having no, this is okay. これでいい。Having contrast in your picture is just one aspect of this picture. You can have interesting images with really low contrast. For example, here Kana is doing some research on backgrounds, and she pulled some images from Studio Ghibli movies. So for example, you can have a picture that looks like this, which does not have a lot of contrast at all. There's no blacks, there's no whites, everything is kind of dulled down and everything is kind of in the middle of the scale. Again, something similar than that I showed you. If we open this picture in Photoshop and kind of erase the character because it's dark on purpose, You can copy something over it. And we need to get rid of the bars. Okay, so if we look at the histogram for this one, you can see it's perfectly in the middle. It does not have any whites and does not have any blacks. The contrast is really low on this picture, but it does not mean it's a bad picture. The contrast, everyone wants contrasted pictures. I don't because maybe they are not know what they are doing. If for example you're the person who commissioned a picture from you says that it needs more punch, it needs more contrast because we are printed and it's like contrast and contrast, then I don't know, maybe really they need just a really contrasty image because they like images like this or they get used to images like this. But having low contrast in your picture is not a bad thing. It's just a choice that you make for your picture to work. And I actually think that really contrasted pictures can get really digital looking really easily. But yeah, if you want to avoid this, this is a thing that you have to think about while doing the sliders here. So if you have a picture like this that has low contrast, you can put some more contrasted colors on it to make it more contrasty. So this is just your creative choice to make. When you are deciding this, create this kind of scheme of colors and where do you want to have more and less colors, is just your choice. For example, if I would do really realistic Japanese street background, so I would really try to recreate this photo like what I was really seeing that day, I would go for the black shadows. So the finished picture, if we look at it, it would look, if we put some curves on it to adjust the thing, it would look something like this. Maybe less saturated, but something like this. Hue saturation. So we have the we can compare kind of the result. The more contrasted version is probably closer to reality. Light in Japan can be really harsh and produce really harsh shadows and really harsh highlights. And if you just take a camera outside and take some pictures, they would look something like this. If you could look at this picture that is from the shadows are really hard, and we could paint the painting like this, or we can paint the painting like we want it to look. Of course, that depends if we want to go for the full realistic effect or for an illustration, for an image of what we feel we would like to produce. So this again is probably just a question of approach. So if you look at some of my videos where I explain how I paint my pictures on YouTube, you would see me just starting painting from like A to Z and everything just flows. But along the way I make some decisions about the colors and some decisions about the shadows that you cannot see in the video, but they are there, and I try to stick to the rules that I myself kind of decided to make the thing consistent. If I want to paint a picture, I have a 60 color palette. I can use all of the colors, but most of the time I use like 4. But for the details that are there, I have some additional ones. But most of the times I use about 4 or 5 colors to establish the core of the picture. So like if you look at the graph, that would be like the shadow color, the highlight color, the middle color, and some accents of different colors, but more or less this. And these actually can be made from just 2 colors. I will show this in a minute in with watercolors. On a computer you have to choose these 3 colors, but with watercolors you can mix them. So the intensity of the color and the shadowness or highlightness depends on the mix. So you have a color A, that's your and B, that's your base, and then you mix them together, and then you add water, and the amount of those 3 colors will define the core of your picture. In some way, yes. Inishi says traditionally looking backgrounds are less contrasted. In some way, yes. This comes also from the paints. You cannot produce like really black blacks, and the white of the paper is not perfectly white. And when you scan it or photograph it on film, it loses a little bit of contrast also, and then when you reproduce it, it loses a little bit of contrast also. You can ramp up the contrast in digital media, but when the animations, for example, were made still on using film, they would lose the contrast a little bit. If you compare, for example, old Ghibli films like Nausicaa and the new ones, the old ones are less contrasted because of the process and the paints, but it also makes them look a little bit more delicate and a little bit more kind of human touch. So this is the kind of direction I would like to go. Using like really black blacks is something in the digital art that can make it look really digital. Experimenting with the contrast and putting all your colors like in this small space here or this small space here is a thing that I would recommend a lot for learning how to decide colors for your paintings. かなちゃん、夜のやつ一枚とかある？コントラスト少ないやつ、全体暗い。おお、これいいね。ああ、キキの部屋でいいね。そうキキの部屋で1枚だけで。Okay, so I will switch to my watercolor camera, but I want to show you one more thing. Okay. So, for example, here is one more shot from a Ghibli movie, and this is like before sunrise. So the contrast is really low on this, and we have some dark places here, but there are almost no like whites and highlights. So the contrast is low. Even the darks are not like perfectly black or anything like this. And if we see like this one, for example, this is also like on the whole it's really a dark background, but the contrast is nearly not so high. The greens in the trees are really difficult. I, to be honest, completely struggle with the green of the trees. This is a problem that a lot of artists have because we know the green of the trees because we see it a lot. And it's really hard to do it, to do a comparing tree green Also because tree leaves can be like half translucent and there's a lot of layers, so it's easier to decide the colors for buildings and for the road and stuff like that, but it's harder to decide the colors for the trees. This is something I still struggle with, and it also depends on the type of the tree that you are painting and on the highlights, on the way that the light kind of hits the leaves and reflects itself. So there is, in a way, a different set of rules for the trees, but I try to stay with the colors in the area that I chose. For example, in this picture, I really avoided putting dark, saturated colors on the trees, even though in reality the trees are really dark and really saturated, because it would not fit the overall image of the illustration. So I tried to pick a color is still in this area and is dark enough so it will be a shadow. So I kind of used this main shadow color here for the shadow on the trees. If you have a look here, I used the main shadow color here, and I used the little bit darker shadow here also. But I tried to stay with the color of the leaves in the general kind of area of the colors that I decided to use for this illustration. So if you kind of are aware of the rules that you yourself made for the picture, and if you protect them, no matter what, the picture will be more true to the theme that you chose. I know that this is a tautology, but while painting, it's easy to forget the kind of idea that you had and just go wild here and choose whatever color you want. And limiting yourself is actually really beneficial to painting a lot of times. Okay, I'll switch to my camera. Camera, can I switch it? On. Transition and focus. Yay. And this is the tablet I'm using, by the way. It's the wireless one, but I usually use it with a wire because it lags a little bit. Okay, so I have a sketchbook here. Is it in focus? Yes. Is it upside down? Also yes. It's good on your screen, but actually the drawing is like this, so let's modify it. Okay. Okay, so I'll be using my main Schminke set. So the numbers I'll be writing here will be numbers from the Schminke set. So, for example, let's say we have our graph, and here are the darks and here are the whites. So we want to make a color scheme that will be roughly around here. So these are will be our shadows, and these will be our like highlights. And also we need to find some colors here in the middle that will be like a core of our picture. And one of the ways that we could approach it to choose the colors that we need from like a huge palette that we have is to again limit ourselves in the choice. So for example, let's pick 3 nice colors that will produce a good and flexible base for our painting. So one of the mixes I used a lot in my paintings is the Caput Mortuum red. Caput Mortuum! Because it's a intensive red, not so saturated, and it's really flexible because we can mix it with a nice blue like helio turquoise, for example, like this color. So we have Caput Mortuum 645 and we have helio turquoise 475, and by mixing these two colors together, okay, by mixing these two colors together we can get a neutral kind of looking grayish blue color, which is a really nice color for the kind of middle ground here. Maybe make it a little bit more blue, like this. We could also use this blue color here for some highlights, or little bit of this red for some highlights, for the white that is not completely white. But if we take these two colors and properly mix them together, like on a palette, I have a palette here, and I'll take just a good amount of the Caput Mortuum color and a good amount of helio turquoise and mix them together like this. We can produce pretty nice shadow that will be not too dark, not too light, but at the same time kind of neutral enough so it does not mess with other colors in the picture. Caput Mortuum. So for example, this is one example that I liked to use in my pictures a lot. So to fill this up with other colors, we could use something like English Venetian brown and a nice green that's not so saturated, so cadmium green, I think it's called. And we could use, for example, Naples yellow reddish to make a nice kind of scheme of colors that we would like to use and repeat in the whole picture. So, different approach. Again, with this kind of way of thinking, I'll zoom a little bit so you can see better the colors. Okay, so we have, this is a nice mix, and we have some colors here which are the highlight colors, the middle one, and the shadow. Of course we can make the shadow more bluish or more reddish, however we need. If we need more like bluish shadows, we can add more intensive blue here, and the Caput Mortuum just push it back a little bit so we have intensive like blue shadows. Or we can add more Caput Mortuum, so make them or on more dull side, so like this. So here are the numbers. This is 649, this is 512, and this is 230. Camera pan, manual camera pan. Okay, so another example. Let's use another two colors. we could use the mountain blue, for example. If we go for like more reddish blue, this is really light color, especially in Schminke watercolors. It's more like pastel looking. If I would try to recreate the illustration that I showed you with in the first part of this kind of tutorial, and then I would use probably this mixture. This is mountain blue. So it's 480, and you could use something similar to this, like maybe cobalt blue, phthalo blue, probably Prussian blue, maybe. Just experiment a lot with the colors that you have. And I have the madder brown, so it's like a reddish brown color. It's like this. So here we have more saturation in both of the colors, but when we mix it, it again produces a nice neutral color that is more warmish, more red, and this is also a nice base color for our picture. So we would paint it like kind of here. It would be hard to make a nice shadow with this. Let's try to make the highlights first. So we have a blue highlight, and we have a reddish kind of really light highlight, and we have the shadows. Let's try to make nice shadows with these colors. So I'll take a lot of mountain blue, and I'll try to mix it with the madder brown. Okay, and let's put it here. Okay, so this is the darkest shadow I can get with these two colors. Okay, you cannot see it. Okay. So this is 670. So here we have the highlights. So here we have the darkest tone that we can get with these two colors, and here we have more or less the middle one that we can get with this mixture. And because the shadow is really light, probably we are kind of here on the scale of dark and really white colors. Shadow, highlight, and of course we can like add the colors here. So for example, for this scheme I would aim for something more saturated, so we could go for olive green, for example, which is a nice green color, and I would add permanent orange, which is like saturated orangish color also. And for the yellows we could go with I don't know how to pronounce it, Jaune Brillant, or like this kind of chalky bright yellow. And when we paint a painting, we kind of think about this kind of scheme that we devised for the painting, and we can if we can, we follow this pattern here. So for the darkest parts we use colors from this part here. For the middle ground we use this. For the highlights we use this. If we need something bonus, we try to not go over these lines that we ourselves kind of made. So we test colors on a test scrap piece of paper and see if they are kind of outside of these boxes. For example, this orange is turning to be a little bit more saturated than I thought, so maybe using a little bit of the blue to dull it down would be better. Okay. I don't care about pigments so much. I know that some colors will work together because I tested them before. I do a lot of color testing. So if you look at my kind of shelf that I have stuff, I have charts and tests of colors that I did. For example, this is a color test kind of sheet that I did for a 6 color set that I will be showing in a next video, and I have 6 colors which are more or less random because these are just colors that I had on hand, and I mix them and try them together and to see how they work together and see how what results they produce. It's sometimes really hard to predict what colors will look like when you have just 2 paints. So it's really interesting to mix them together and try to decide what to use as a main color. So for example, here in this set, this 649 brown, which is actually the English brown, and the Delft blue, which is this one, work kind of nice together if you mix them and produce like a dull gray. So we could use these two, for example, for main color scheme for our painting, or we could use this blue and this red and try it out, and it looks okay. So let's use it. But once you decide, you kind of stick to the pattern. You try to stick to the pattern as much as you can, even if the color that you are looking for is kind of outside of what you can do with these two, or but if it's a main shadow, then you have to use what you decided. This is the most simple, of course, method. Sometimes you don't have a choice, if but if you want nice consistency, it's really important to stick to the rules that you made by yourself. Okay. So, for example, again, we have our line, and let's use something different this time. For example, let's use indigo, and let's mix it, or not, let's use let's use manganese violet, which is this kind of crazy violet color. And let's use something equally crazy like cobalt green dark, which is like, or perlin green. I use perlin green in my night paintings a lot recently, which is this really beautiful green, but it's really dark. So when we try and mix them together, I don't know what happens. I haven't tried this mix yet, but oh, the result is really interesting. So we get this dullish kind of gray. So let's put it in our chart. Probably it's somewhere here. Let's try to do some highlights with this one. Okay, so they are somewhere here, and also with the violet, so they are not really bright. And let's try to make a nice dark color with these. Which will be probably easy to achieve because these are, especially the green, is really intensive. Ooh, this is nice. So we are kind of here. So with this pattern, we are more to the left. So we are probably kind of here-ish on the scale of things. So we don't have any lights. We have like the middle tone is really pushed to the left, and we have really dark color. So this is 474 and this is 784. And if I would paint a picture with this color scheme, and this is actually really interesting, I would like to use it. I personally would try not to get any brighter than this. That would be very interesting to paint something like with this color scheme, especially like a night scene or an evening scene, and not to vary from this would be a challenge, but probably would make a nice result. And we could add Madder Brown, for example, for nice like warm glow, or Prussian green maybe for like deep blue things, and the deep red 366 for reddish things. I didn't have place, but these colors would be like here. So having fun with your colors and mixing them together and seeing what kind of interesting mixes they produce is really important, not only to know your tools but also to have some ideas for color schemes that you can use in your painting. On the computer it's really easy because you can just slide your sliders and the color comes, but here you have to sometimes mix paints and match them to get a nice kind of color pattern that you can later use in some of your paintings. If you have only 6 colors, you can combine all of them and see what happens with each of the mixes, and then choose the pigments and choose the paints that work well with each other. That's why this is why a lot of the watercolor review channels do the charts, so they mix everything with everything and see what is happening. So for example, I got a new set from Mielo, and I the first thing I did was testing all of the colors like this. So I have all of them. I'm seeing them for the first time, so I tested them like this. But the second thing I'm doing, I made some mixes that I thought would be interesting. I will make more of them, but I made some mixes that I thought are probably interesting, and I already seen some candidates that would work well as basis for color schemes for future paintings. And each of these is viable. I could paint a painting which the base is red and green. This is also a really interesting thing that I want to try sometimes. Maybe for trees this is probably important thing to know. So yeah, having something like this and then kind of analyzing the picture that you have in mind, or you have a photo of, or you are seeing it with your own eyes because you are painting in plein air, and having your color scheme and kind of trying to match the things. So you have your color scheme here, like I want to use these colors from the dark to whites, and for me I want to put most of my colors in this box here. This is my darkest color, this is my lightest color. and I have the image that I'm seeing, or I want to paint, or I want to recreate, and the image is kind of like this, with really dark darks and really white whites and something spiking here in the middle also. So you have to kind of do what printers do in your mind. So you have to match the color profile of the picture to your color scheme. But you are not doing this only by squeezing this and putting it in your color scheme, but matching some of the main points. So I have this color here, and I have this color here, and I have this color here. And I think that this part of the base picture will be this, and this one will be this, and this color here will be this. Of course, this is an abstract thing. You cannot do it like this, but this is just to show you what I mean. And if you stick to your kind of scheme of that you devised for the painting, it's easier to have a consistent effect. So it's easier also when you have fewer colors than the more actually. Okay, this is more or less what I had in mind for today's session about colors and choosing color schemes. I hope that I said something that will help you in future paintings and will help you when choosing colors. This is more or less what I do for my paintings. The thing is that I do not make graphs like this for each of my painting. I just have some experience in this already, so I already have some pairs and some colors that I know will work well with each other for the highlights and for the shadows and for the accents. So I kind of build up on this experience, but also I really like to explore new possibilities by mixing new colors together and creating new bases that I use a lot. For example, I have been using this one with the Caput Mortuum color and this blue for a long time in a lot of my illustrations, like up until the Yokohama series probably. But lately I like a little bit more pastel looking paintings. That's why I switched to using this one for a base more. But sometimes it's really good to explore new things. So painting, for example, a monochrome picture only using these two colors would be really interesting. So this is maybe a thing that I will try next. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me here. I did some paintings with poster colors, and it's actually similar to gouache enough that I would not bother actually in painting with poster colors and buying poster colors if you have gouache. And I think they are just cheaper version of gouache that was made for the animation studios, that they can use it in a lot amounts, because you can buy it in jars like this and not so expensive. So if you have gouache, just stick to gouache, and I think it's really similar. Okay. I think that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. Sorry that the beginning of the stream was a little bit rushed, but I hope if when you review this and kind of try this method, maybe you will find some interesting colors and color mixes that you can use also in your painting. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for supporting me on Patreon. I will have some really interesting announcements The book I'm working on right now is already on pre-order on Amazon, so I'll be talking about this on Patreon also soon. So see you in the next Q&A session and see you on Patreon. Thank you very much for joining, and thank Kana for helping with some images today. So
You're welcome.
thank you all. Bye. See you in the next one.